Hey guys, this is Justin. Hello and welcome to another video, and today we're continuing our coverage of the Bad Batch with a look at one of the big lingering questions that still exists after the end of Season 1. Does Crosshair still have his inhibitor chip? Now, today's video will contain spoilers for the season finale, so if you haven't seen it yet, maybe hold off. As a note, because I don't want to mislead anybody, the picture that I chose for the thumbnail does not actually come from the final episode, but we'll discuss that in today's video. And the issue of Crosshair having his chip has been purposefully left ambiguous through the show, and that's no accident. It's not just a coincidence that Crosshair suffered a serious burn over where his chip would have been removed. That's there so we don't have clarity, and also so Hunter doesn't have clarity. The issue is still at question for both the viewer and the Bad Batch themselves, I would argue. And yeah, this isn't a question that we can definitively answer, but I do think there is some evidence that he may have the chip in, and I also do have some personal theories, which we'll discuss as well. One sort of neutral point that I do want to discuss off the bat is Crosshair's headaches. This show has conditioned us to watch for clones touching their heads because that's often an indication that the clone is fighting against their inhibitor chip and that the inhibitor chip is fighting back. People have pointed out several moments over the last two episodes where it seems like Crosshair may be having a headache, but I personally don't really see it. To me, it looks like Crosshair is more just internally conflicted. We see this one scene, which I know some people are pointing to as a sign of a headache, and I don't see that. I more see an individual who is just frustrated and who is confused. Seen other screenshots, including the one that I chose for the thumbnail, but again, I think he's more expressing with his hands rather than indicating that he's having some sort of pressure or pain in his head. I will also say there are moments where he does something that would be against the Empire's wishes when he saves Omega, and we don't see any sign of him fighting off the chip. We don't see him have a headache there. I'll talk about this later, but it seems to me like Crosshair's internal conflict is what's driving his indecision, and it largely has to do with the love of his squad versus his sense of duty. In other words, we don't see Crosshair struggling when he's doing something bad. We don't see the chip popping in when he's helping his friends. We also don't really see him tempted to otherwise do good, but again, I'll talk about this later on in the episode. That being said, I haven't scanned every single scene, so if there's an instance that I'm missing, please let me know. So yeah, I think that's sort of a neutral point. Also, let's look at Crosshair's face and his head. Obviously, the side of his head is obfuscated by the scar, as we discussed, but I also don't really see, even with that being accounted for, an area where the incision could have been. I mean, I don't think that would fully cover up an incision. It is possible, though, and I also don't think there's evidence of Crosshair having an incision before being blasted by the vendor's engines, just because I think a fan probably would have picked up on that. What I think is a better argument, however, is just looking at the situation plainly and logically. How would Crosshair have known about the chip, and how would he have removed it without the Empire recognizing that? Like, even if Crosshair is fully evil, or at least has a propensity for fascism, I don't think that would be enough to satisfy the Empire that there's no potential of going rogue, especially when he does have this relationship with the other members of the Bad Batch who he's supposed to be hunting. If they do go with the plot thread that Crosshair does still have the inhibitor chip, I think the explanation and the rationale will be that Crosshair believes and was told that the Empire removed the chip rather than fully activating it at the beginning of the show when he was in the machine and they were messing with him. Is that a satisfying explanation? Well, I don't really know, and that takes me to the counter arguments against this chip theory. I think the main one is the fact that I think it would be boring. I think it would be a fake out where one isn't needed. The story is more compelling with Crosshair having the chip out and just being different than the other clones, and we know that despite being genetically the same, clones can rapidly diverge in personality based on their experiences and whatever else. There are other arguments as well, and I think the strongest argument against Crosshair still having the chip is the fact that his actions aren't really in line with what we see of other chip-inhibited clones. For example, he has a rationale that he seems to really believe about why he should join the Empire. For one, he feels betrayed by his squad who left him behind, even though he clearly was under the effects of the inhibitor chip at that time. For 2, he has a rationale for why he's fighting for the Empire. He doesn't think that regular clones have a role in the new Empire. He believes that as an elite clone, he still does, and that's the only way that he can really remain relevant and be a part of history. He also seems to believe that the Empire's law and order would be good for the galaxy, and that doesn't seem to me like something that's brought on by an inhibitor chip. That seems like something that he genuinely believes. Contrast that with Wrecker. When he goes under the effect of the inhibitor chip, he just repeats good soldiers follow orders and is pretty much just an automaton. Crosshair seems to be driven by a real philosophical difference in opinion, which again I think is more interesting than it just being the chip. The final bit of evidence for me is the fact that Omega seems to believe that the chip is out. Now, again, this is just a little girl's belief, but she was around for the creation of the Bad Batch. She's very familiar with the inhibitor chip. She has a lot of knowledge about what goes on behind the scenes when it comes to cloning and everything else. And when she has that conversation with Crosshair in the finale, I think she's speaking honestly, and maybe that's meant to indicate to the audience as well that the chip is out. So for me, I think there's evidence indicating that the chip may still be in, but when you look at everything, it's more likely that the chip is out, in my opinion, which is actually kind of a different point than I expected to reach when I started thinking about this video. And I also think that's the more interesting and just the better point and the better direction they should take the show. Just my opinion though. I hope to hear yours down below. Before we end this video though, I will take a second and answer a hashtag AskEck. And today's comes from Mr. Gray, who says, what is your favorite Timothy Zahn Star Wars novel? And this is a great one. For those who don't know, Timothy Zahn created a lot of the Star Wars Expanded Universe, including the big blue boy himself, Grand Admiral Thrawn, Mara Jade, Talon Karrde, and many others. I love pretty much everything Timothy Zahn wrote in Star Wars Legends, and I like most of his canon work. When it comes to my favorite story, it has to be something for me from the original Thrawn trilogy. I really love the Thrawn duology. I love Outbound Flight. I really love, again, pretty much everything he made in Star Wars Legends. But for me, the original Thrawn trilogy just really captures the magic of the original trilogy, probably more than anything else. When I talk to people about my favorite Star Wars things after the original trilogy, I always talk about The Mandalorian, and I say that may be my favorite non-original trilogy Star Wars product besides for the Thrawn trilogy. When it comes to those 3 stories, it's hard to say. It would definitely either be The Last Command or Heir to the Empire. I think Heir to the Empire does a great job of setting up the time and setting up pretty much everything that would establish the Star Wars Expanded Universe, so I'm probably going to go with that. And again, it does a great job of feeling like a continuation of the original trilogy, much better than Dark Empire, which it was competing with. But The Last Command is also really great because we get to see this intricate plot which Timothy Zahn has been weaving through 2 books, and the 3rd one come together in a really satisfying way, in my opinion, while also teasing a lot about the future. So they're all really S-tier books for me, but I think Heir to the Empire has to be my favorite. I'm going to read them all again, probably once or twice in 2021 and 2022. I like to read them at least once a year, so I'll give you another opinion when I have it. But thanks for the question. I will be doing a question and answer in this coming week as part of my Patreon. You can ask me about anything from Star Wars to personal stuff. I might not answer it, but if you do join the Patreon, you get a guaranteed answer as long as the question's not really weird, but you can still submit them with the hashtag AskEck. Till next time though guys, have a good one, be safe, and may the Force be with you.